an exciting part of the day. We get to hear about living case studies, real entrepreneurial journalists doing their thing, creating new ventures, building new communities for their projects. We are going to be hosted by Ariel Zerolnik in this session, and I'll let Ariel introduce the folks that we've assembled for today in just a moment. But I just want to thank everyone for the participation so far today. We've had a lot of really interesting dialogue in the initial 2 sessions, and then in the networking session. It's really exciting to see the assembly here of people who are creating things and supporting other people who are creating things. So it's an ecosystem that's evolving as we speak, and it's exciting to have an opportunity to see people convening to talk about these things. It's a new world. There's new platforms. There's new monetization approaches. There's new growth approaches. There's new challenges that people are facing, with everything from burnout to trying to figure out how to stitch together all of these different tools and platforms and techniques and tactics. So it's exciting that we're all able to gather and talk about all this. So I'm going to turn it over to Ariel. I would just want to say a couple of housekeeping things beforehand. First is, please use the Q&A to ask questions you have along the way. We'd love to hear what you're wondering about, and that will help us to address topics that are of interest to you and points that you want to hear more about. So use the Q&A to frame those questions, make them as general as possible so that others will benefit, so that they're not just specific to your personal project necessarily. And then during the Q&A parts of it, we'll surface some of those questions and try to address them. And feel free to use the chat also. So those of you here have a lot of ideas and resources and input to share and experiences, and you're working on your own projects. So feel free to take the opportunity to use the chat to share some of that with others who are here, who will surely be interested in that and appreciate your input in the chat. So feel free to use that. There's a live transcript. If you want to see that, just click the live transcript button on Zoom, and you can show either the full transcript or the subtitle if that's useful for you, or you can just hit it and turn it off if you'd rather not see that. And with that, I will turn it over to Ariel. Thanks, Ariel, and thanks to our special guests for being here. This is a great assembly of experts, and it's a privilege to have you here with us. And Ariel, who's been a fantastic instructor for us, guiding a lot of our creators in learning about the development of community and building membership programs, and has done that so expertly at the Membership Puzzle Project, and now has a new gig, which is really exciting. And so more people get to benefit from her expertise. Thanks so much for guiding us in the discussion, Ariel. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. And thanks so much for inviting me to moderate this. I've had the opportunity to learn from Brian and Bola in the past. And so I'm just excited to bring some of the conversations that we've had privately sort of into the public fore and hear how they're doing, what they're doing. First, I'll introduce Brian. He's joining us from Miami. Brian has spent 20 years covering the media and advertising business. He spent nearly a decade as president and editor-in-chief of Digiday Media, a vertical media company with titles focused on media, fashion, beauty, and retail. He's now building the Rebooting, a media company for those building media companies. He started that with a weekly Substack newsletter, which the CUNY team will drop a link to in the chat. And he'll soon be expanding to a podcast and later of in-person and virtual events. We'll hear more about sort of that building of revenue streams later in the discussion. And if you aren't subscribed to the Rebooting yet, I highly recommend it. It's something that really makes me think on a weekly basis. And it's a good sort of introduction to this space. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Yeah.
And Bola Awoniyi is the COO and co-founder of Black Ballad, which is a media and data company that's building the ultimate lifestyle experience for Black British women and beyond. He's a former digital transformation analyst who co-founded Black Ballad in 2014, which began as a blog and grew from there into a member-supported platform, and from there into a company integrating content, community, and data to help Black women live their best lives. They recently closed out an equity crowdfunding campaign that raised more than $400,000 US. And Bola will tell us a little bit more about how all that came together later in the conversation. Bola has been somebody that I've learned a ton from about the importance of sort of knowing your community deeply and integrating that into your revenue decisions. And I think you'll learn a lot from hearing from him as well. So thank you both for joining us. I'd love to sort of set the scene for everybody who's here first. So if each of you could share a little bit more about who the target audience for each of your ventures is, what's the revenue mix that's supporting that at this stage, and what do you think is the value proposition of that? We'll start with Bola this time.
Well, thank you for having me, and I got to say it's a big honor to be on a panel with Brian. I feel like I got half of my media education from his previous podcasts and current newsletter, so really happy to be on a panel today.
I hope it works.
Well, I hope so too. We're going to find out together. But Black Ballad, yeah, as Ariel said, you know, we started in 2014, and we've evolved a lot since then. Started off as a blog to empower Black British women, and we sort of transitioned to a membership in 2016 when we decided we actually wanted to make some money from our website. And since then, we've evolved to a company that uses media and data to help Black women live their best lives. So today, we're trying to figure out how we can build a membership that offers Black women the ultimate lifestyle experience through content, through digital and physical events, through lifestyle perks and more. And building a membership focused on super serving, professionally ambitious, culturally curious, and socially conscious Black women means that we're in primary position to enable the brands that want to reach, engage, and understand our audience. We're sort of best positioned to sort of serve and help them. So over the last 12 months, I know it's been a bit crazy for everyone, but over the last 12 months, on the B2B side, it's been advertising and sponsorship through our media and our events. We've also started to experiment with group subscriptions to universities, and we've combined that with some consulting, with using our audience to do some product development. So we've really tried to have a varied approach to how we generate revenue. And B2B revenue makes up about 69% of our revenue mix this year so far, with the consumer revenue being membership driven, and then tickets to events as well.
How about you, Brian? You want to read us in on the rebooting?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I think the moment where you become a journalist is where you lose your job because of bad business models. For me, that lasted all of a year before I lost my job because of a bad business model. So it was like, welcome to the profession. And this has been going on for the 20 years that I've been part of this profession. I went from place to place and saw bad business models. And a lot of times the business models were not aligned with the editorial models, and we can get into why that was. But about 10 years ago, I was covering businesses too. So it was like very meta, as we'll get into with what I'm doing now. But you know, about 10 years ago, I was the digital editor at Adweek, and there was like no business model there. It was coming out of the financial crisis, and it was, if you wonder why all those like lists get produced, the 35 CMOs to know, or the 35 up and coming CMOs or whatever, it was just to try to figure out a way to make money off congratulatory ads. That didn't really seem like a sustainable model to me, but nobody asked me. So I want to do something on my own, but I didn't have the risk profile to do it. And particularly at the time, there wasn't like Substack and all this stuff. So I went to Digiday. That at the time it was about 5 people, and it was mostly an events company. And you know, what that provided was the ability to build publishing on top of an events model. And there's B2B has long monetized in slightly different ways than B2C, and events have always been an important part of that. And so, you know, that's what we did. And we grew from 5 to about 75 people. And you know, my job changed quite a bit. You know, I went from doing, you know, really quote unquote, just content to, you know, we started a membership program under my group, and the technology and product and events programming was under me. So I ended up having like one foot in a little bit in both worlds of, you know, both weirdly writing about like that we were covering this stuff, but we were also living it, like as you know, a bootstrapped media company, building a sustainable model. Because when you don't have funding, you have to fund yourself the old-fashioned way by profits. So leaving Digiday, I was thinking about what to do next, and I started a Substack like many people. It was originally like a bit of like a personal project, but I really had it in my mind to that this was going to be what I would do next, because I knew that I enjoyed the earlier days more than like when we broke into departments and there was lots of people. It was nice to have a lot of colleagues and stuff like this, but your job changes. You're very internally focused. And I think that's a challenge I think we'll get into for solo creators, is because you have to do a ton of stuff outside of the core work of creating a product people want. And that can be really difficult to balance. So the rebooting is really, to me, it's taking that advantage of having one foot in both worlds. There's a lot of people who are starting media companies right now, and I think it's great. And I think that there is a need to have a place where we can share information about how to do this in a much better way than many, if not most of us, have already experienced with losing our jobs after a year in the profession.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sort of joining an organization and realizing they don't have a business model. When I talk to people sort of just entering their first job out of college, one of the questions they ask me is like, what should I know? And I say, always know how your publication makes money, even if you're not touching the revenue side at all, because the revenue model that they choose, it does put limitations on what's in scope. And so understanding whether it's a paywall-based a subscription-based organization or membership, like what they're asking you to do might be different, even if you're not directly touching the revenue. When we were preparing for this call, Brian, you talked about the importance of sort of matching the editorial model to the revenue model. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that. Like, what are the questions that people should be asking themselves as they're trying to choose the right revenue model for them? And then Bola, I was wondering if you could share how you made those decisions for Black Ballad when you were getting started.
I think the story of publishing has been really, since the internet started, digital media has been indirect business models, right? So everyone said, content has to be free and you'll have a much larger audience and you'll be able to make money by advertising for the most part, indirect. So in an indirect model, your audience are not your customers. Your customers are advertisers. And that creates an inherent conflict. I mean, we talk about conflicts all the time in journalism, but that's a real conflict. Imagine if you opened a restaurant and the people eating your meals were not the people paying you. You're not completely aligned to making the best meals. You might be making different stuff. And I think we've seen that, and we've all had to do some of that. Like I had to do some of those 50 CMOs to watch lists. Did I want to do that? No. Did it have like real value for the audience? Minimal. But we had to sell congratulatory ads. That's what we would tell ourselves. So I think it's really important to match up the business model with the editorial model. And the editorial model ideally should come first, because I think that would be more sustainable. Now, aligning it with a subscription, I think, which a lot of people do nowadays, has a lot of advantages, but there are drawbacks. If your job is to solve like a local news desert problem in a place, like maybe a membership model that is a little bit more around like a Patreon kind of approach would be better. Because if you're walling off your content in a paywall, you're probably not aligned with your mission. You're not solving the problem you supposedly were going to solve. So I just think it's really important to think about that. It's hard to make money, but being able to craft the editorial model with the business model together, I think, can be really powerful, because we've seen what happens when it's the other way around. Might as well try something new.
Thanks, Brian. And yeah, Bola, how did you make that call at Black Ballad early on?
It wasn't anything as sophisticated as what Brian just outlined. We started.
It never is as nice as it sounds on paper.
I mean, so my co-founder was my girlfriend at the time. She's now my wife. And so I guess things worked out. But we were running Black Ballad as a free blog for 2 years, and we were pumping our own money into it. And we sort of looked at each other, looked at the life we wanted to live, and say, hey, we actually need to make some money out of this thing, right? So this was in 2016, 2017, about the time that you were really seeing traction for things like The Information, things like The Athletic. And, we just had this general hypothesis that if you can have a well-defined audience and create really good content and experiences, you can probably get them to pay for it. Not everybody, but enough people. And that was sort of our starting point. So we decided to actually first we tested this thesis: would Black women be willing to pay for a membership? And when we did the initial research, like only 5-6% said they would, which was kind of discouraging. But we sort of like dug in more and said, well, okay, what exactly would you be looking for? What type of content? What type of experiences? And the thing that sort of was super overwhelming in the responses is that people just wanted places and spaces where they could come together and just be, without having to put on any pretenses, without having to put their, not necessarily their best foot forward, but put on the version that they are at work. They just wanted to come and be themselves. And so we said, okay, let's do this sort of membership thing, and it'll be content, and it'll be a little bit of events and online community, and it's just about Black women living their best lives, being their best selves. And so that's how we sort of came up with the Black Ballad membership. We again tested it from a price point standpoint as well. So we did a kind of informal crowdfund, and we said, well, if we don't get to sort of £10,000 in pre-launch memberships, we're not going to go forward. We got to £12,000, and we had a pretty good idea of what people wanted to pay. Well, I say that now, maybe not so much, but we felt like we had a good idea. We had a good enough idea that we were willing to sort of like continue. And so we did, and we've been sort of growing and trialing and erroring ever since. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. It's like, you're always just going to have a hypothesis. Like and you just have to test the hypotheses and be okay if your hypotheses are not going to be proven out. I mean, I would always say that Digiday is like, because a lot of times you fall into, it's like the person who makes the most or is the highest in the org chart magically has the right idea. It's like, really? That's uncanny. Everyone you just need to test it out. And conversion, it's like, you're always going to convert between 5 and 10% anyway.
Yeah. I think that's the.
I was going to say, I know that now.
I didn't know that at the time. Yeah, the benchmarks are a lot better now than they were a couple of years ago when you and Toby were trying this out, right? We've gotten much more realistic understanding of what's possible. We've seen a lot of organizations, Membership Puzzle Project, do what you talked about there, is like using a crowdfunding campaign as a way to test whether there is enough enthusiasm for the thing that you're doing, that it's worth investing in building out the more sophisticated sort of membership model there, staffing it, getting the tech stack in place to support it, behind the scenes, that kind of thing. Bola, when we were preparing for this call, you talked about it's not subscription or advertising, it's both plus more. And I'd love to hear, you're still a pretty tiny team, even though you've grown. So how do you manage multiple revenue streams at a time? And sort of what does your day-to-day look like? How do you figure out what's the right way to monetize each of these sort of parts of our work?
Yeah. So in terms of our team, we're a team of 6. We've got 2 in content, 1.5 in audience development, 1 focused on commercial and 1 focused on commercial, 1 focused on admin, and another half that's spread across data and tech. But everyone that we have on the team, we've made it super clear from day one that Black Ballad is a startup, and the definition of startup that we've used is simply a company that is trying to figure out exactly how it creates consistent, sustainable revenues. So as well as creating the content, as well as distributing the content, as well as giving our audience these experiences, it's part of everyone's remit to come up with ideas, get involved in revenue experiments. And so that's how we sort of share the responsibility across us, but it's probably useful if I give some examples. So we officially switched on advertising as a revenue stream last year summer, after seeing the spike in advertiser interest in the wake of Black Lives Matter. And so our CEO decided she would dedicate time to sort of developing relationships, and seeing what was available, because part of the reason why we did the membership in the first instance is because our audience was deemed too small to get any meaningful advertising opportunities. So over the sort of 6 to 8 months, we literally just said yes to everything. A, so that we could have those relationships, but B, so we could build the muscle so that we could see what aligned, what worked well, what didn't work well. And so as a team, we would know how to handle this stuff. So that meant our editorial team started doing commercial content as well. Our audience development team was learning how to do media plans, and our office manager was engaging in sort of doing the account management. And that worked out really well for us. So to date, we've generated £300,000 in ad sales, and we've got nearly £500,000 in bookings for Q1 next year. But now this approach is really sort of like being strained on everyone's time. And so we're beginning to sort of unbundle those roles and responsibilities from the people in the team. And we're beginning to look at how do we staff this properly and, create dedicated resource to this. So that means, bring on a commercial person. That means building out a dedicated freelance pool just for some of the advertising work that we're doing. So it's very much having a kernel of idea that might come from us, that might come from the market, testing it within the resources we have in team. And then if it grows, build on it. And if it doesn't, see if we can kill it quickly.
I think that leads into something that both of us talked about, is how, when you're in a niche venture like yours, a small team like yours, you have to make that decision of what things do we do, what things do we hire out for. So I'm curious, what are the things that you have hired out for? What are the things that you've sort of kept in-house? And are there things that you waited too long to hire out for, or things that you took out of house that you realized maybe that was a mistake?
Yeah, so one thing we outsourced quite quickly on when we decided to do the membership was the actual technology, underpinning the website. So again, this was 2016, 2017. This was before Substack. This was before, not before Memberful, but like doing the sort of Memberful thing felt too complex to do as someone that wasn't actually a techie. So we outsourced the tech, we outsourced the front end, and we just said, you guys know what you're doing. You guys focus on that, and we'll focus on trying to build the audience and creating the content. Let's see. On top of that, as I said, the sort of when we have the advertising projects, we look in-house first to see who can actually create the best content for that. And if we can't do that in-house, then that's something we take outside, A, to make sure that our client gets the best work, and B, so that we can do it in a way that makes sense for our audience. But I think my general principle, our general principle is, what are the core things that are going to bring Ballad value in the long term? One, we want to be able to know how to create and curate the best content and experiences for this audience. So we try to do as much of that in-house as possible. Two, we want to be the best at reaching Black women on our own platform, through our newsletter, through the social channels that we develop, and any other distribution channels. And three, we want to be the best at understanding Black women to help us inform those other two things. And so when it comes to data acquisition, when it comes to trying to unpack the data and see what it means and experiment, we attempt to do as much of that in-house as possible. So that's our philosophy there.
Thanks. How about you, Brian? What have you kept sort of doing yourself, and what are the things you've over time realized it's better to give to somebody else to handle?
I mean, I'm earlier on this journey, so I'm kind of doing it all at this point. I mean, pretty much all. I mean, partnerships are super important. It's something, Ariel, you and I have spoken about. But like, in anticipation of this, I wrote down like what my morning was. Like, okay, so I got up, I did a last minute edit to the actual product, because I woke up like any sort of journalist being like, oh, I know I made some mistake, or I left a K in there. And of course it went out with a typo anyway. And then I dealt with design issues, because I put out a new design. And so I had to deal with the designer and Canva. I'm new to Canva. And I'm all of a sudden, I'm like, I don't understand the layers and stuff. I'm not a designer, but I have to play one. And then I recorded a podcast intro and a video interview. I did a memo for a consulting client. I set up a call with a potential sponsor. I have a call later with a client. I had a meeting with a reader who's running a small media business. I'm doing this. Talked about a promotion with a company that I did a little angel investment in. So there's a ton of stuff, and my sort of approach right now is to spend a year really understanding what I can do myself and what I need sort of partners with. So I'm not going to design stuff myself because I'm not a professional designer. So I had a designer I wanted to work with. I could, doing a podcast, I could probably learn like, podcast software, but I'm like, I don't want to. And so I hooked up with like a producer to do the podcast audio and video, stuff like this. I have someone who's helping me out on the growth side, just like with advice. And it's like a barter deal because I'm giving him advice on how to build his business and stuff. And then I'm also doing consulting like on the side, because at this point, I want to be able to figure out the product before I make any decisions about like where memberships fit in or subscriptions or anything like that. But it's like, it all comes at a cost. And I feel like when anyone is like deciding to go this route, like, you got to be aware that it's really hard to do everything yourself. And your most precious resource is your time and your focus. And I know I felt that over the years. I used to, at Digiday, I used to list all the stuff I had a pie chart of like how much time I actually spent on the content, which theoretically was the product and stuff. And sometimes it was down to like 10 or 15%. So you have to sort of avoid that. I feel like, and really wherever possible, your biggest leverage, particularly if you're, a creator doing this, is making stuff. So like, keep doing the stuff that is the most important. And for these businesses, for the most part, it's the product itself, which is the content. Everything else is negotiable.
Right. And you got sponsorship sort of pretty early on in your journey. And I was actually curious about that because Bola spoke about how hard in the beginning it was to get advertising because advertisers had deemed Black Ballad's audience too small. And you and I spoke a little bit, Brian, about how do you pitch sponsorships when your niche and your audience is quite small? How do you figure out that? How do you make that pitch effectively?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I thought of in going into this was like, what are the sort of unique advantages that like I would have? And, one of the unique advantages was I've been, that's why I stayed in this niche. I thought about, I'd love to build like a publication. Like, I think decarbonization of the economy is like the biggest business story of our time. I thought about going in that direction. But at the same time, I realized that I would be sort of foregoing all of the advantages I had. So maybe I was being a wimp by just like sort of staying with what I knew, but that's what I did. One of the advantages of that is, I had a reputation and I know a lot of people in the industry. And so like, before I even started, like, and I don't say this, like I was just lucky, like, and that's why I didn't go to subscriptions is I had someone reach out and be like, oh, I want to sponsor. I'm like, I don't have anything yet. But I'm like, this is good. And I was like, I put together like a proposal and I had no idea, but I remembered in my head, like that I've heard many times, is like, always put a number bigger than you're comfortable putting. And I did. And the person's like, yeah, we could do this, but I want to add some stuff. I'm like, oh my God. So if I sell something for, let's say $20,000, I'm like, I can find 5 people who can do that. And then like when the audience doubles, I can charge 35. And then like eventually, so I'm like, that seems to me like, that's a signal. And so I looked at it as a signal. Maybe it was lucky once, but then if you do it a couple more times, I always just think if you can close like 4 or 5 deals at that level, there's like 10 to 20 out there. So that's the way I've looked at it. It's like, it was a little bit of like an advantage of just having, having done this for many years.
That process of raising prices is always kind of a nerve-wracking one, right? But at Membership Puzzle Project, we've seen people really fret about raising their membership price, for example. And we're just like, just do it, just put it out there. And most of the time, people will follow up to that higher price point because they value the content. But it's a nerve-wracking thing to come in with a higher number, whether it's your monthly membership fee or a sponsorship pitch than you think is okay.
And to be clear, it's very different in different. We talk about publishing as like a one entity, but it's really different. Like what Bola's audience is very different than mine. Mine is like a B2B audience. So if I did have like a subscription or membership, I would definitely want to make it so that it was extensible because, there's a reason that business class tickets are way more expensive than economy class, like just because people are not as price sensitive when it's other people's money. So like I'm sort of in an other people's money bucket, which again is like it's a good advantage. I feel like, but it's smaller, so you can get you need to have a higher price because the numbers are simply smaller. Like the number of, like my audience and my focus is like people who are building media businesses. There can't be like, I have no idea what the total, what is the TAM is of that, but it's not like, 3 million people. I don't think.
Anything
In my VC deck, it's going to be 3 million. So it's fine.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Bola, about like figuring out the price point and whatnot, and what you've learned from that over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when it comes to the price of the membership. We've always had in our heads, people are either directly or indirectly like comparing this to the price of their Netflix subscription or to the Spotify subscription, because it's all part of like their overall entertainment bundle. And I suppose maybe that's more of a consideration for like a B to C audience. But either ways, getting people to pay for the membership and pay for content is still a bar up from people having access to the content for free. And so like from an organizational standpoint, the focus should always be how can we create the best content and or experiences that are worth paying for and actually seem like a great deal. And this is something that we're experimenting with a bunch over the summer, because we were preparing to do a book fest, a Black Ballad book fest. So a large number of our audience, they're readers. We saw a lot of people doing virtual events, but a lot of them were doing it for free. So we said, okay, let's take our like company mantra and say, how can we create a virtual event worth paying for? That's super good, worth paying for. And our head of editorial said, okay, cool. I'd love to do like a book festival. I've got a book coming out later this year anyway. Like it'll be really cool. And so actually we created an event where the all access pass was between 40 and 60 pounds, depending on the membership type that you have. And we had over 150 people buy the all access pass, and then another 100 plus people buy the sort of event specific tickets. And so I don't think people necessarily have a problem with paying for things, especially if they've bought into you as a brand, as a creator, as a business. You have to just be upfront and honest with, are we actually creating something worth paying for or not? Should this be for free? And sort of make that value proposition and decision from there.
Yeah, and also people make like buying decisions on a bunch of different things. Like sometimes people are supporting the mission, right? Like, so it's not like a straight economic decision. I feel like particularly when it's more personalized versions of media, there's a lot of people I'm sure who are paying you, Bola, because they believe in your mission. Like, it's not like a straight economic decision. Like, do I want this shirt? Do I not want this shirt? And I think that's powerful. I mean, I think some places like overplay their hand with that because you have to provide real value. Like you said, you have to make content worth paying for. But at the same time, there's definitely an element in this area, I feel like right now, where there's somewhere between Patreon and Piano. I guess that Piano is like one of the big paywall providers. There's somewhere like in between that, where people's decisions, particularly if it's like aligned with an individual, are it's almost patronage in some degree, but it's like sort of subscription.
I don't think this has come up in our conversation yet, but I think it's worth mentioning. Black Ballad also has a Slack group, a member-only Slack group, where members are sort of in conversation with each other. And I think, Bola, you've seen that in and of itself is something that people become members of Black Ballad for. And I remember you telling me stories, people helping each other out through like salary negotiation conversations and things in this Slack group. Where does that factor into people's decision to support Black Ballad? How much does that community come up versus the content?
I think the Slack specifically is something that people really appreciate after the fact. When we're serving our members and they talk about, we ask them, what are the things you're enjoying in Black Ballads? A lot of them, the premium ones, talk about the fact that just being in a safe space with people that look like me, that think how I think, has changed my life, has been life-saving. And in some ways that's like super heavy and full on, but it's beautiful to see, and it's beautiful to sort of facilitate. It's beautiful to sort of facilitate that exchange and that community for our audience. But it's something that I don't think we actually do good enough job of trying to sell upfront, if that makes sense. We talk about digital community, we talk about, you know, creating spaces where Black women can live their best lives. We don't sort of directly abstract the Slack conversations and say, in Slack, you can do A, B, C, and D, or in our premium community, you can do whatever. So actually, that's something that I'd love to next year try and figure out if we can sort of sell the value of being in Slack as part of the membership a bit more.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a retention strategy too, right? Like maybe people are too busy to read all of the content that you're producing, but if canceling their membership means losing access to that Slack community, that becomes another sort of thing that makes a stickier relationship. One last question I wanted to ask before we move into some audience questions. I tipped off at the top a little bit about the equity crowdfunding campaign that Black Ballad just did. And I was curious if you could say a little bit more about that, because we promised we talk about revenue experiments here, and this is something that isn't being tried very much yet in the media space. So can you say a little bit more about that, Bola, how you decided that an equity crowdfunding campaign was a thing to try and how it went?
Yeah, so we had previously been part of an accelerator, a startup accelerator in 2019, and like there was a lot of onus on, you guys should raise money, like raising money is great, you should raise money, why don't you just raise money, like it's that easy. And so we tried for 2 years and we barely raised anything because we're a media company. Or we were a media company because we are a niche media company, and because we're a niche media company for a consumer audience, right? So we were having a conversation with a fellow entrepreneur, and they talked about the fact that you already have all of these people that buy into you on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis. And everybody wants to invest in stuff anyway. Why don't you try doing an equity crowdfund? And this was like, what, after 1.5 years of hearing no upon no from every angel and VC going. So I said, okay, cool, let's just try it. And we were able to get about £250,000 in sort of pre-registration commitments. So, okay, cool, we'll do that plus a whole bunch more. That's fine. And it didn't quite work out that way, but we were able to sort of combine £210,000 from the equity crowd fund with an additional 127,000 from some angels and one VC to sort of flesh out our round. And in truth, I don't think we did anything particularly amazing in terms of like encouraging people to invest. I think that the 7 years prior of Black Ballad investing, Black Ballad existing, showing up in our communities' lives, providing value through the content, creating safe spaces, digital and physical, was all of the campaign momentum that we had and needed. It was just a case of continuing to remind people of the work we had done, and you know, trying to articulate some of the things that we'd love to do in the future if given the opportunity. Because in a way, funding it is all about opportunity, especially when you're in when you are in startup land. And Black women generally, outside of just media, don't have the opportunity to do some of the things that others do. So I think that particularly resonated, but the 7 years that we've spent serving this audience, I think, was the main catalyst for you know, 1,390 plus Black women and allies saying, hey, we want Black Ballad to continue and to grow and to thrive. Like, here's some cash.
And it sounds like that equity crowdfund is the thing that maybe got on board some of these angel investors and VC companies that initially said no, or maybe were skeptical. Like that became something you could hold up to them as, look, no, this is for real. We've got this.
It's hilarious. We had a couple of angels that we were in 6 to 8 month conversations with, and every time we thought we got them over the line, they would come back with more requirements. You need to do this. Can you show us this? Tell us how you think about that. And then when we put out the pre-reg form and we started to get the responses back, we had a conversation with an angel the sort of next day, and you know, we weren't even trying to get his investment anymore because we said we're doing a crowdfund thing. So we just mentioned in passing, like, yeah, the pre-reg form has been out for, you know, 36 hours and we already have £150,000 in pre-reg commitments. Within 24 hours, he said, yeah, I'm investing 50K.
Hard to get, Bolt. We're like, sorry, no.
Right. Yeah, it was a similar sort of thing with the one funds that invested. Once they had seen the commitment from the audience, it was a much easier sell to actually get them to join the round. Yeah,
well, it's a great proof point, right? I think like, you know, we're sort of moving from like audience to like community, and that's what membership's around, to like ownership. Like, not to get all crypto, but like there is some interesting stuff with like how people are, it would make sense that the progression goes to from someone feeling part of a community and paying to be part of a community to actually owning part of the community, and in some ways influencing the direction of the community. There's obviously a lot of details to work out, as there usually is. But I think like
you're tapping into something.
Yeah. No, you're definitely right. I mean, last week, our community started to get their share certificates, right? And, you know, they just started sharing on Twitter, hey guys, I got my Black Ballad share certificates. That means I can retire and forget this godforsaken life. I'm going to live high on the hog, and like it was said in jest. But, you know, having our audience advocate, you know, for us in that way and be proud of their ownership and be proud of their affiliation with Black Ballad is exactly the thing you want.
Yeah. I mean, on the crypto thing, maybe it's because I'm in Miami, but like, you know, if you look at what's going on with like that Bored Ape Yacht Club and stuff, it's very easy to like sort of, you know, make fun of it. I know like as journalists, we should always be cynical and stuff like this, but there's something kind of interesting there when we talk about how to build sustainable media models and being able to create these communities that people are not only a part of, but are invested in. Because I feel like the financialization of everything is not like a blip. Like I feel like that's going to be the future to some degree.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's the future. I think it's perhaps a bit early for Black Ballad's audience and for a lot of sort of consumer-oriented audiences, but I definitely think, you know, the NFTs, is it DAOs, the decentralized?
You could convert it into a DAO. I don't know. It seems a little Lord of the Flies, but like I think there's something there.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, companies.
I apologize.
The
neighbor just fired up a leaf blower, so I'm going to keep myself muted now.
Oh, those are the spurs.
Questions.
Yes.
But I wanted to move into some questions now from the audience. We have one from Renata Hill, which I think I'll kick to you first, Brian, since you're also consulting with other small media companies in addition to building your own. Renata wants to know if either of you have created business plans, either like a lean canvas style or full-blown business plan, and maybe how would you recommend somebody get started if they're sort of working on a venture alone on their own? Like, what's the right way to get started at this like sticky problem of figuring out your business plan?
I don't know who it is, but like, I remember reading somewhere or hearing somewhere that like the most important part of a plan is the planning, like not the plan itself, because everything changes. Like, I mean, but the planning process forces you to think through and make decisions. I just wouldn't get like too paralyzed by it, because like Bola said earlier, like you have hypotheses and you test them out and you're going to have to change stuff. I've never been part of anything where the plan or the roadmap has been like even like directionally how things have gone. So like I still do the sort of planning, like with the sort of, you know, here's what I think the sort of business plan will look like, but I really do it like I do it like a year in advance. I'm like, here's the things that I want to like accomplish and then evaluate. For instance, like even on growth, like I've been open in my news, like it hasn't grown as fast as I thought. Like, I'm trying to figure out, well, you know, maybe it's too niche. And I'm like, no, but I get really high engagement. So that's fine. I'm okay with that. And, you know, on the business front, it seems okay if I'm going to continue with sponsorship. I don't get a ton of pushback on that for now. So I just feel like it's the process of forcing yourself to think through, you know, one, what is the differentiation that I have or we have in the market? And then two, if we do nail like the actual execution piece, what are the ways that we're going to be able to extract some value for all the value we're creating? But like, first and foremost has to be creating value. Like, I mean, without the creating of value, you're not going to be able to make money. So like, focus first and foremost on creating value, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, for this investment rounds, we've had to do plan upon plan and pitch deck upon pitch deck. And they always get changed because an investor is like, I really like how that sounds, so I don't really agree with that, or you need to change this and that and the other. But the most useful thing about creating business plans and things of that nature is just having a really strong idea of what the environment in which your business operates in, you know, having a really strong understanding of what that looks like. So you can sort of do the mental gymnastics of, okay, the environment is changing. How does my business or how does my approach need to change? And does that mean tactics? Does that mean strategy? For me, that's been the most useful part of the sort of business planning process. The projections, oftentimes they're literally just, and it doesn't really work out. But yeah, just having a sense of the environment around you, whether you're using sort of a pestle framework or a Porter's 5 forces or something along those lines, I found to be really useful.
Thanks. And I think actually that point about investors wanting to make revisions to your business plan all the time is actually a good lead into the second question we got from Nigel. He asked for you, Bola, how do you manage a relationship with the investors? Are they investing to receive a dividend? And I think that that's probably referring to the equity, those who are part of the equity crowdfunding campaign. But in general, how do you manage investor relationships and keep them from steering you off course, maybe because of some idea they have or conception they have about what your company exists to do? And I'll kick that question to Brian too after.
One of the beautiful things about having the majority of your rounds funded by your community is that you're not managing a small group of quote unquote powerful investors that think they can push their way around. Actually, you're answerable to your audience. And from that standpoint, managing our audience or managing our investors hasn't actually changed so much because you know, the core of Black Ballads serve Black women, whether they are readers, whether they are members, whether they are our writers, whether they are investors. So from that standpoint, it's not changed massively. But we do have people on the cap table that aren't Black women. There are people on the cap table that that are looking at Black Ballads just as a business opportunity. So for the time being, we're not paying them a dividend. The investment is purely for growth, and to take money out via dividend will be sort of counter to that. We do have plans to, you know, as I've said a few times, the goal for Black Ballad isn't to be just a media company, but it's to create the ultimate lifestyle experience for Black women in Britain and beyond, and to help brands reach, engage, and understand Black women better than anyone else. So we do have a few things that we're working on, specifically when it comes to sort of building a business around our understanding of this audience that in the long run should provide a really healthy return for our investors, but no dividends just yet.
Anything to add to that, Brian, about sort of managing investor expectations, how to,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like particularly niche media businesses are really difficult as pure financial investment vehicles. Like if people are looking to put money somewhere to get a 10x return, I would definitely do Black Ballad, but otherwise, like it's like very difficult to like do with media because it takes a long time. I mean, like, you know, imagine if you had done this to begin with 7 years ago, right? I mean, like it takes a long time in media. This is not software. It's not a SaaS business, even if it has a subscription. For me, I know, like, you know, with Digiday, we had one very small outside investor that came on when I was hired and needed to have a salary in order to pay rent. But I also saw the downsides of that, honestly. Like, you know, this person got way too much equity for way too little money. And, you know, I was like, oh my God, this is all just so I could pay rent. And, you know, personally, I just think that, you know, you got to match up the reality of your situation with, you know, the funding that you decide to do. Like, I mean, I just decided to try to do this as much as possible with, truly independent without any investors whatsoever, because I don't know what it is or what it's going to become yet. And I also value independence. The downside of that is like, I do a lot of, doing consulting. I still have rent. Rent is consistent. But like, I do consulting on the side and stuff like this. And that takes away from, in many ways, it takes a little bit of focus away from the product, but at the same time, like the kinds of consulting I'm trying to do it in a way that it adds to the product itself, because I'm consulting with people building media companies, and that's what I'm writing about. And so it's like, it's very meta, but like
it's a necessary cost for you to have the freedom that you want, right? It's necessary.
Yeah, that's the way I got it.
Yeah. I think that's actually a great lead into a question I wanted to ask both of you is sort of, what are the mechanisms you have in place to get regular feedback from your community members? It's pretty clear by the end of this conversation that both of you know your audiences really well. And so that is feeding the stories that you decide to do, how you pitch advertisers and all that. So what are the ways that you get this feedback, whether formally or informally, on a consistent basis, that you can ensure that sort of product market fit is spot on?
I ask people to email me.
How many emails do you think you get a week in response to the newsletter?
Like 30, 40 or so. I mean, like, it's a good engagement way. I mean, it's obviously, it's not like, statistically significant, but I feel like over the years, I feel like a lot of people go too much to quantitative and not enough to qualitative. Like, and the numbers are the numbers and stuff, but you have to combine that with, hearing people talk about like your product is more important than the click-through rate or the open rate and stuff. It's important, but it's a different, like, if they're saying the things about what you're putting out in the world that you're thinking without saying, that's a good sign that you're onto something, because that means that what you're after is resonating with at least some people that are regurgitating it back to you. So that's good.
Yeah. And the questions you're getting from these people you're consulting with and who are applying to the newsletter are probably questions that others have, right? So it can feed into the newsletter.
That feeds in. Yeah. So ideally, that's I don't know, on my like VC deck, that's going to be a flywheel, I think.
Bola loves a flywheel.
I emailed Brian, and it was well worth my time. Let me tell you.
Okay. When I close my $10 million round, like, it's all going to be because of that flywheel.
Bola, what does that sort of listening sort of cycle look like for Black Ballad? Where does the information come in from? How do you sort of feed it back into the decisions?
Yeah, so I mean, when we started BB, I was very cognizant that I'm not actually a Black woman. So I'm not actually the audience. So I need insight if I'm going to do my job well. So from the beginning of the membership, even when we were planning it, we made a conscious effort to ask questions of our audience all the time. And so we do that in a bunch of different ways. We have an onboarding email, an onboarding survey that we send out to new members to understand everything as basic as their sort of where they live, and everything as in depth. Everything from where they live to how they want to change the world. And that sort of insight on an individual and then sort of larger basis is really cool for just helping us create personas of who this audience is and who this woman is. On top of that, we regularly, or I say regularly, we are starting to regularly do like quite large editorially driven sort of surveys. So typically these surveys are about 120 to 150 questions in length, and they go super duper into a particular topic. So we've done one around Black motherhood or Black British motherhoods, and there's probably a case study that is, there you go. And those insights are really useful for a bunch of things. Telling us where our audience stand on these issues. They inform the content that we do. They help us to create personas. They give us like really useful bits of insight that we can take to advertisers and say, hey, Black women in Black mums in Britain don't feel like they're being represented in media or advertising. That's what 86% of them said to us. So it's really great leverage for speaking to people that want to reach and engage and understand our audience. But you don't always have to do like a massive survey in order to get that sort of insight. I spend a ridiculous amount of time on Twitter just looking at what our audience is talking about. And we use that as the basis for events, for content, for social media posts. And so anywhere where you can sort of see your audience engaging and interacting is a pool for idea generation and data and inspiration.
And I would just say, like, I know we're running out of time, but like, just like talk to people, like talk to your audience. Like I remember when we started in journalism, like you never heard from your audience. You like threw stuff out into like the ether, and then like you moved on to the next thing. And I think one of the things that's changed even with like, you know, Web 2.0 and comments and social media and stuff is people talk back. But like the best thing is to just talk to people and to listen to people. And that can determine like not just editorial, but products. For instance, like I think my brand's a little bit different because it's a little bit more personal brand and stuff. So it would be weird if like it was like what, you know, it's going to be more generated from my own experiences. But like product ideas, like I keep hearing from people get in touch with me saying, hey, do you know anything? I'm like looking for a new direction and career. And I get all these people coming to me saying, hey, do you know someone who can do this? I need to find this person. And I'm like, well, there's some kind of matchmaking there that I can do. If I'm getting this from both sides and I'm in between, there's probably some kind of thing that I could do here where I could create value. And if I create value, I can figure out a way to like, extract some fair bit of value.
Yeah. And even if it's not your capacity right now, a year from now, you might be staffed to sort of add that now. Right. Well, we're at time. And I know there's one more session coming up at 3. So I want to give people a chance to step away from the computer between then. But thank you, Brian. Thank you, Bola, for getting so into the nitty gritty of how you all are both making it happen. I think these very practical conversations could be really helpful for helping others sort of problem solve through their own challenges as they build their media business. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks for all of the great answers. And we've got links in the chat if you want to catch up more on sort of the Black Ballad surveying process and sign up for the rebooting and all that. So please keep in touch, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.